God is the creator. He creates in abundance. There's flourishing. There are 360,000 different species of beetles, not the pop group, but the little bug. And there are 30,000 kinds of orchids. This is a reflection of God, who can't help himself but create and create more and create a beautiful wealth of colors and animals and so forth.
So business is God's way of providing for people. We pray in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. And business, vocation, is God's answer to that prayer. And businesses need to focus on producing goods and services that will enable humanity to flourish, because God's heart, of course, is that all of humanity should flourish.
Wealth creation is important because it mirrors God's heart. Genesis 1, He created us. We are not just souls, empty souls walking around without a body. He's created the body, He's concerned for the body, and wealth creation is that which provides for that body and others.
God wants everyone to have abundant life. And having an abundant life also means having a decent and a life where you have good self-worth and you can live well. And so we want to join this movement and this initiative to think about creating wealth, offering jobs, providing for people to live well.
In our context today, wealth creation is as much about the Great Commission as it is about anything else. And so business is or must be involved in unfolding the Great Commission as we move towards the second coming of Jesus Christ.
So wealth creation is biblical and good, and it's a concept that is worth pursuing. But it's not just a concept. We also know that it actually works.
We must get a healthy relationship to money and finances. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil, but the love of money. But somehow we have misinterpreted that verse and used money as an excuse for not doing what we should be doing. I believe that God wants to use finances and resources to expand His kingdom. So by developing a healthy approach to it, we must remove some of these stumbling blocks for the advancement of the kingdom.
How are we impacting culture? How are we having a conversation with culture? How are we standing in between the sacred and the secular worlds?
Bert, thank you, Arco, for the invitation to come and share about business as mission and wealth creation. They are related. The video vignettes you saw here, they were a little bit covered by Zoom symbols, but that's not original. That's a Zoom edition on this call. Are actually videos based on the Wealth Creation Manifesto, which we will refer to during this conversation. Wealth and wealth creation. Bert has already mentioned that it is a tricky word to translate, and it has all kinds of connotations in English, in Swedish, in Dutch, in Japanese, and you can go on. But nevertheless, the concept of wealth, flourishing, in different parts of life is a biblical concept. So we have to go beyond the trickiness of the word in and of itself and look at the biblical concept of wealth and wealth creation, and also look at what does that mean practically for us as people in business, and what does it mean actually for countries. Because the wealth creation issue is not just a conceptual conversation. It's not just a theoretical discussion. It actually has huge implications on people and on nations. Now, if I were to ask you, looking back about 50 years or so, the last 50 years, And looking at the globe, the whole world, has poverty increased? Has it decreased? Or has it stayed about the same? Do we have more poor people today than we have 50 years ago? Do we have less? Or is poverty about the same year after year, decade after decade? Most people actually think that poverty either increases or it stays the same. But that is wrong. That is false. The biggest lift out of poverty in the history of mankind has happened in our generation. Not through aid, not through charities, but through business. Different kinds of wealth has been created in and through business. And in China alone, it has lifted more than 500 million people out of poverty. If we just go back about 30 years, about every third person on the planet was poor. Now it's less than 1 in 10. So poverty has decreased dramatically. Why? Because of wealth creation through business. So when we talk about wealth creation, it's actually real life stuff. It's not an academic exercise. It is something that affects hundreds of millions of people. I am in Sweden right now, and most of you are in the Netherlands, and we're quite prosperous country. We have not always been that way. And how we view wealth mentally, what is our thinking about wealth? What is our thinking about wealth creators? What is our thinking about businesses as wealth creators? What is the system we set up as nations for wealth creation through business has huge implications. Let me give you an example. North Korea, South Korea. North Korea and South Korea. There's people who speak the same language, have the same culture, live in the same geographical area. One country is dirt poor, people are starving, and the other country is one of the richest countries of the world. We can even go back during the Cold War times and look at East and West Germany. Same people, same culture, same language, same geographical footprint. One was very prosperous, one eventually crumbled because the economy didn't work. And we can go on and look at examples as Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Cuba, how we view wealth, creation of wealth, and wealth creators makes a difference, even on a macro scale, even on countries. And this is a reason why we we started a global consultation on the role of wealth creation for holistic transformation of people and societies through business. Now, this is not the first time the church has discussed the issue of wealth and poverty. It has gone on before. And of course, we know that political parties, left, right, and the middle, they also discuss poverty, wealth, business, and so forth. But we wanted to find out what were biblical principles, biblical truths about wealth, wealth creation, and wealth creators. And what can we learn from history? And what are examples today of wealth creation that makes a difference for God, for people, for businesses, for communities, and for nations? And we reversed the question that is often asked. Often it is being asked, how do we fight poverty? We changed that question to, how do we create wealth? How do we create wealth? And what does the Bible say about that? Now, what we did during this global consultation, which then culminated in 2017, 4 years ago, also looking at our roots. And it's quite interesting because, our roots, as Christians, then we may be Protestants and evangelicals. Well, our roots are, of course, the Catholic Church, and our roots are also Jewish. And if you look at our Jewish roots, I mean, after all, Jesus was not a Christian, he was a Jew. If you look at what the Jews have been saying through centuries, is the highest form of charity to help the poor is not handouts, is to help them to get a job, to be able to create wealth. That's a very Jewish concept. And so when we talk about wealth creation and understanding it from a biblical perspective, we're also looking at it historical perspective, digging into our roots as a church and also into our Jewish roots. Now, when we talk about wealth creation, there are kind of extremes here. Poverty, almost like a poverty ideal, simple lifestyle, and so forth. And the other extreme is some kind of prosperity theology. And both those extremes are not right from a biblical perspective. And in Jewish thinking, it's also very, very clear that poverty is a curse. A personal life choice to a simple lifestyle, fine. But poverty, which is usually imposed on people or is something that they want to live in, that is not a choice and it's not a blessing, it is a curse. So when we talk about wealth creation on the other extreme, it's not on how do we make people rich. It's not in health and wealth gospel. So those are sort of extremes. Another issue as we looked at the whole issue of wealth creation is how do we approach the resources that do exist? And this is not exclusive to Christians to think about these things, but how we think is going to affect how we try to solve problems. Now, if you and your wife or husband decide, let's have a pizza, have a takeout pizza, bring it home and share a pizza. You get one pizza and you share it 2 persons. You get half each. When you sit down to eat your pizza, maybe your 2 kids come over and say, hey, good to see you. Oh, and then you have 1 pizza and 4 people. Then you say, well, instead of having half, we're going to have quarters. We have to share it in smaller and smaller pieces. And then the neighbors come over. There are 4 of them. And all of a sudden you are 8 people to the pizza. So now you have even smaller slices per person. That is one way of solving the problem. More people who you're going to feed, smaller and smaller pieces. The other way is, we got more and more people. Let's order more pizza. This is a very simple analogy on how we approach people. Even if you go back, historically speaking, people talk about Malthus, for example. He talked about we're going to run out of food in the world. Because the population growth is like this and food production is like this. One is sort of exponential and one is more linear. And so we're going to run out of food. And people talk about endless sources. We talked about peak oil, we're going to run out of oil, and then there's going to be catastrophe and so forth. And then instead of thinking, well, how do we create new resources, new energy sources? So you can either have smaller pieces of the pizza or you bake more pizza. And wealth creation is about the concept of creating more. And it isn't sort of a limited finite amount in many ways, because today we're over 7 billion people on this planet, and we're still feeding all these 7 billion people. If you go back 100 plus years or so, there were people who said, oh, we can't feed that many people. But we need to think, well, there are business people that have solutions. You create more solutions, more products, more services, more kinds of food. And that is a basis for when we talk about wealth creation. It's that problem-solving mentality. We create more. The Wealth Creation Manifesto is a summary of the Wealth Creation Global Consultation. We had a number of working groups looking at wealth creation from a biblical perspective, historical perspective, looking at the poor, looking at creation care, and so forth. And one of these papers have been translated into Dutch, and as well as the Wealth Creation Manifesto. And the Wealth Creation Manifesto is a one-page which is kind of a summary of all these 7 papers that we did. And then we did a video series with 13 short videos based on the Wealth Creation Manifesto. So that is the background to that. And part of the background to that consultation was a previous consultation in Atabaia in Brazil, 2014, where there was a discussion on the gospel, the poor, and prosperity theology. And many world-leading Christian leaders were very afraid of even the term business solutions, creating wealth. Many of them suggested, well, if we just have to cut smaller and smaller pieces of the pizza, we just have to all go into a simpler lifestyle. And some of us say, how do you define a simple lifestyle? You can look throughout church history. People have tried to define what simple lifestyle is. Nobody's ever been able to do that. Can you have 2 shirts or 1? Can you have 3 bedrooms in your house or 2? There isn't such a thing like a general rule, what is a simple lifestyle? But what we do know, that we can create more. So the consultation at Atabaia in 2014 in Brazil ended with sort of a question mark. What is a Christian approach to poverty? Is it just smaller and smaller pieces of the pizza, as it were, or does business have a solution of creating more kinds of wealth? One more thing, and then we're going to look at some of the things in the Wealth Creation Manifesto. So when we say wealth, in English and in some other languages, even more so, when we say wealth, people think financial wealth. They think money. But that is only part of the picture. So when we talked about wealth in the Wealth Creation Manifesto, we talk about different kinds of wealth. You can be financially wealthy, have a lot of money, be rich, but you can be socially poor. You have no friends. You can be financially rich, wealthy, but you can be spiritually poor. You don't know God, or you haven't turned your life over to Christ. So there are all kinds of wealth that does exist, not only social and financial wealth, there's also intellectual wealth. You see some of the books here this is my dining room at home. This represents a lot of intellectual wealth. There's also a lot of cultural wealth. We can think about, music like I like, like Beethoven and Mozart and Bach, for example. That is a wealth of music. And I love cooking, and and there's, if you travel the world, and even you don't have to travel the world, you can just go to downtown Amsterdam, or where you'll find different cuisines. There's a wealth of cuisines. And businesses are strong wealth creators, different kinds of wealth. If you've been to the US, one of the biggest grocery stores, a chain, is called Whole Foods. And the founder of that, his name is John Mackey. He wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism. He's not a Christian, but he thinks bigger. And he actually talks about businesses that they should create eight different kinds of wealth, because that's what businesses can do and should do. And of course, he talks about financial wealth, social wealth, environmental wealth. He talks about intellectual wealth, cultural wealth, and he also talks about spiritual wealth. So talking about wealth creation, and even it's not just a particular thing for some Christians. This is a conversation that also goes on in the business world in general. So the Wealth Creation Manifesto, let me bring that out here. Affirmation number 1. Wealth creation is rooted in God, the Creator, who created a world that flourishes with abundance and diversity. We are created in God's image to co-create with Him and for Him, to create products and services for the common good. So, wealth creation is not just an activity, it's not just a concept, it is rooted in who God is. And one of the videos, the wealth creation videos, shows that as well. Then I talk about, God, He creates in abundance. It flourishes. There are 360,000 kinds of beetles, that little bug, not the pop group, but the bug, the insect. 360,000. There are 30,000 kinds of orchids, the flower. Who needs 30,000 kinds of orchids? Nobody. That's not a primary need. But that is who God is, who can't help Himself but to create in abundance, and it flourishes. So when you walk into a grocery store in the Netherlands, you find lots of different kinds of cheese. If you go into a grocery store in America, you find a lot of different kinds of cereals. And in a grocery store in Sweden, you find so many different kinds of bread and toothpaste and so forth. And some people, that's so many varieties. Well, that is an indication that we are created in God's image, and we are creative, and like God, we continue to create. And we create new kinds of cheese, new kinds of bread, new kinds of toothpaste, new kinds of cereals. It's a wealth of stuff. Affirmation number 3 in the Wealth Creation Manifesto says that wealth creation is a holy calling and a God-given gift which is commended in the Bible. Wealth creation is a holy calling and a God-given gift which is commended in the Bible. Wealth creation appears quite early on in the biblical narratives, in the biblical stories. Well, starts, of course, is Genesis chapter 1 and 2. We are created to be creative also in business, to create different kinds of wealth in and through business for multiple stakeholders. But then it's also a calling, a God-given gift, and a godly command. Where do we get that from? Well, the people of Israel had been held as slaves in Egypt for many generations. Then God called Moses, took them out of Egypt, walked through the desert for 40 years, and then they were supposed to enter into the promised land. As they stand about to go into the promised land, God tells them what to do. He gives them instructions. You can read about this in Deuteronomy chapter 8, the 5th book of Moses, chapter 8. And God tells them specifically, when you come into this country, you are to start businesses. You are to seize business opportunities. And two industries are mentioned specifically. One is agricultural, farming. You know a lot about that in the Netherlands. And the other one is mining, the mining industry. And then it is implied that when you start these businesses, wealth will be created, different kinds of wealth. But then God warns them and say, then you may boast and say, hey, look at us. We are so good. We have created all this wealth. Then God tells them in verse 18, no, I am the God who gives you the gift to create wealth. So first God tells them, create wealth. And remember, I gave you the gift to create wealth. So wealth creation is both a godly command and a godly gift. So it may be a tricky word in Dutch and in other languages, but it is a biblical concept, and we need to look beyond the connotations the word may have in our language to what is the biblical concept here, and what are the ramifications, the implications, the consequences for us. Then God goes on in chapter 8 to talk about the context, the framework of wealth creation. Different kinds of wealth will be created as you enter business, and societies will flourish, families will flourish, your nation will flourish. But then God says, but remember the covenant that you have with me. And then, oh yeah, that's the covenant that God started with Abraham and then with Isaac and Jacob. It came, went from generation to generation. And that was that God would bless them. God will give them the gift of wealth creation so they can create different kinds of wealth. For what purpose? So they may be rich themselves? No, so they could be a blessing among all nations. And the head of the covenant is God. So when we create wealth, we are always accountable to God. He is the Lord of all. And we do this with a mentality that we create wealth to be a blessing for others, to all peoples, which then includes Brazil, Tajikistan, Indonesia, India, Turkey, Netherlands, and we can go on. So these are things that we then discussed at the wealth creation consultation. Bert, you have to help me to keep time here. Have I done about 20 minutes now? I can sort of round off whenever you want me to.
You're doing good. Go for it.
I'll do another few minutes then, and then we can have some questions. So number 5 among the affirmations here I'm looking at the Wealth Creation Manifesto in English. It talks about wealth hoarding is wrong and wealth sharing should be encouraged, but there's no wealth to be shared unless it has been created. Number 5. Now, this particular affirmation has 3 words that are essential when the Bible talks about wealth. The Bible talks about wealth in 3 ways. Hoarding, sharing, creating. Hoarding means I want to get wealth for me and myself. I want to be rich. And the Bible says, nope, no good, no good, no good, no good. That's number one. Number two, wealth sharing. That is to give, to be generous, to share with others, people in need, neighbors, family, whatever it may be. Wealth hoarding is, again, number 5 here. Wealth hoarding is wrong, and wealth sharing should be encouraged. But then it comes to the third thing that the Bible talks about. But there's no wealth to be shared unless it has been created. So wealth creation is essential for everything. Wealth sharing is, usually what governments love to do. We'll tax you, we take your stuff, and then we share it with others. It's easy to be generous with other people's money, kind of thing. And there's some good stuff to that. Absolutely. We get hospitals and roads and all that kind of stuff, and schools and so forth. But there is never, ever any wealth to be shared, even by governments, unless there has been a system whereby wealth can be created. This is one reason North Korea is poor and South Korea is rich. This is one reason West Germany flourished, but East Germany didn't. If you look at why Venezuela is a basket case today, is because they didn't think through what are the mechanisms. Yeah, you can be generous as a politician, but if you destroy wealth creation mechanisms, and if you're against wealth creators, you may ruin a country. So again, we're not just talking concepts. How we approach this, internalize it, has consequences. Number 6, just briefly. There's a universal call to generosity. Yes, it's good to be generous. We should encourage that. Contentment is a virtue. Material simplicity is a personal choice. If somebody says, I want to scale down, smaller house, all that kind of stuff, great. But involuntary poverty should be alleviated. Millions of people never choose poverty. It's a curse for them. They suffer under it. And that's where we need to create wealth to lift people out of poverty. Number 8 in the Wealth Creation Manifesto.
That's the last one, Mats.
Okay, then also. Perfect. Businesses has a special capacity to create financial wealth. That's one of them. But also has the potential to create different kinds of wealth for many stakeholders, including social, intellectual, physical, and spiritual wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we're in Egypt, and we're running a business here together. And I find this topic really, well, we both do, find it very, very exciting. My background is in community development, so my passion is working amongst the poor, and that's why I originally felt a calling to move to the Middle East was, I guess, for a dual purpose, but one of those being for the poor, working amongst the poor. And very soon after I came here, I felt God kind of drew me into the whole concept of business. And instead of the traditional NGO model or project model or whatever, but actually, the concept of using business for the benefit of the poor and marginalized. But in now having been working in that field here for nearly 20 years, I've realized that business, it's a big beast, it's a big monster that can just suck up your whole life. And I feel that if we really do want business to be for transformation, for change, and we want it to do more than seeing money being made, which is certainly my passion. Sorry for those, but my passion is very much the bigger picture, as you were talking about, of wealth, the very broader view of wealth, and blessing and benefiting lives holistically. And I see there has to be a very, very strong level of intentionality in business. Otherwise, life will get sucked up. The whole the business sphere globally and locally is set up in a certain methodology, and finances and government taxes and accounting systems. Everything is set up that takes a business on a certain trajectory that unless we are ready, unless our minds are strong, and unless we have a great level of clarity around and intentionality around what we want to do with the business, in what are those bigger objectives rather than money creation, but actually a broader sense of wealth. So we're running a triple bottom line business that we have people, profit and peace. Combination of peace is peace between men and women, peace between Christians and Muslims, and peace with the planet, and peace with God. And so that's a very broad spectrum that we focus on. But you know, even with a great strong level of clarity and intentionality, it is hard work to keep ourselves focused, not just on the bottom line financially, but really to keep ourselves moving and strong and with clear measurable indicators on those other objectives as well. And unless we have those clearly in place and keep them tracked and keep ourselves accountable to those, then for me, I would be very unfulfilled before God. I think that a high level of intentionality has to be in place.
And I think that goes against the grain a little bit of what I studied business and I've practiced marketing for 15 years before working with the Australian government as a trade commissioner, and then started a consulting business in Australia in 2006. And we started this BAM concept since 2012. So we've been running this for 9 years. And since we started this, I have been kind of de-learning what I was taught in university about business. In the world at university, I've been told that the objective of business is to improve and maximize profits and reduce costs. And by doing so, you turn out to be a profitable business. You can grow as a company. You gain financial influence, and so on. But as we continue on this journey that we're doing, I'm learning that in this model that I've taught, money was always here, and all these other resources around it are working to grow it. So these other resources are, you've got your assets, you've got your financial resources, you've got human resources, and even the term is something I actually struggle with. And they all work together to improve that. So, if there is a problem here financially, you just sack a few people. And even in the most affluent, most democratic societies, which is not where we are, that happens overnight. And people lose their livelihood, they lose their jobs, just like a printer or any other asset. And I think that's something that we've really been learning in our experience as we continue to journey is actually from a God's perspective. People are number one. He came and died on the cross to save them. He created the world and the earth so they can enjoy it and benefit from it and look after it. So in this new model we're journeying, it kind of turns the equation there is a bit of a paradigm shift. So money goes down to where it belongs, and then people go to where they belong. So people are here, money's here, and all the other resources in the business are working together to build a community. The community works together, they produce, they sell to market, more money comes in, it continues to build that community. And I think if we look at it, it kind of fixes a lot of things. So we in our journey, there's all these segments, you know. So you've got to look after environment, and you've got to look after, you know, all these different compartments of the business. But actually, they're all linked, and they're all flow into two things really. In practice, from my perspective, is there is the money and there is the people. You know, you create more education. You know, skilling people, that goes to people. You improve the environment, that benefits people. You've got and so on. So that's kind of so this is something that we're experiencing. And it is sort of going against the stream. I remember when we first started, I went to visit soon after we started. Actually, I had and I still have a really good friend. But he's been my business mentor, and he's somebody on the 200 richest people in Australia. So he invites us to his boardroom in a prominent building in the city centre in one of the large cities in Australia. We go in and he gives us 2 hours of his time, and that was pretty significant for him. We take our concept, you know, this new business that we're kind of developing, and as Joe was saying, you know, we were intentional about from day one about integrating all these different bottom lines in our business model. And so we go with 3 slides. One of them is about the money, one is about the people component. And I can't remember what was the third one, but anyway, he basically looks at it and he says, well, he crunches 2 of them, throws them in the rubbish bin, and he says, this is what you need to fix your eyes on.
The money.
That's the money. And we were really quiet. And he said, well, you fix this, you can afford doing all these other things. And I think that's a real challenge for us believers working in the world, because the reality is it comes at a cost. So, you know, we've been running this business since 2012. We have blessed a lot of people. You know, we've trained and released more than 75 people into a marketplace. We have probably given taxes to the government quadruple of our startup capital. We have, you know, we even introduced the first fully compostable product, and, you know, an extremely environmental focused product for the first time in this country. But really, if you look at us as a business, well, we don't really have a lot to show for. Like, if I'm measuring our performance in terms of our market share and where we're at and so on, the reality is we are an expensive business to run. Looking after people is costly. That is something that needs to be costed. Living in doing this business with integrity, you cannot think or do or consider being a godly business and not follow regulations. That's just, you know, from our perspective, you can't really turn around them. So to do that, our taxes were way higher than our competitors because we were just doing everything right. So there is a lot of cost counting here. I guess that's just some of a little bit of my intake on some of these issues.
But in that, our outcomes that we see cannot just be the bottom line financially. You know, the joys to us really are seeing the life-changing things where we really have seen people transformed, where people are sitting reading the Bible, where we're seeing spiritual growth in people who had nothing there before, in communities of people who, Christians, who would never have a conversation with a Muslim ever before in their life, now have friendships and hanging out with Muslims together. So I guess there's many different things. People, we have one woman with us, she's illiterate, never went to school at all, and we've been able to continually find new scopes for her to be able to work. And And that takes a lot of effort. But the intentionality has to be there.
Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure that we can listen to your stories more and more. Zal ik afsluiten met gebed. Vader in de hemel, wij willen u zo bedanken voor deze avond. Dank voor technische mogelijkheden. We hadden elkaar graag ontmoet. We hadden elkaar graag gezien, aangeraakt, samen koffie gedronken of nog nagesproken. Maar dit was ook goed. Dank u dat we elkaar als broeders en zusters mogen ontmoeten en mogen bemoedigen en van elkaar mogen leren. Ik dank u voor Mats, voor het werk wat hij doet in de Business as Mission Global beweging. Ik dank u voor een organisatie als Interserve, die de moed heeft om mensen uit te zenden naar die landen waar het evangelie niet direct welkom is, waar ze licht en zout willen zijn. Ik dank u voor een organisatie als Business as Mission Nederland, die ook dat hier in Nederland wil bewerkstelligen. Christen zijn op je werk en die rol als ondernemer daarin onderstrepen. Heer, wat geeft u ons de mogelijkheden om licht en zout te zijn? Wilt u geven dat we iedere kans aangrijpen om dat goede van u, om dat duidelijk te maken aan onze naasten. Het goede van u als het gaat over, om die Bijbelse termen weer te gebruiken, het omzien naar weduwe en wezen, de armen. Het goede van u om rechtvaardigheid te brengen voor mensen die verdrukt worden. Het goede van u om te zien naar uw schepping. Zo mooi heeft u die gemaakt. Heer, wilt u ons helpen om in al die dingen te laten zien wie u bent. Tot de grotere eer van uw grote naam. Dank u, Heer. Wilt u met ieder van ons gaan? Ik dank u voor Joseph en Joe in hun land en hun roeping. Vader, wilt u met ze zijn en hen beschermen? Wilt u hen heel nadrukkelijk licht en zout laten zijn? En dank u voor hun getuigenis. Heer, en zo draag ik een ieder aan u op die hier aanwezig is. Wilt u ieder van ons ook verder toerusten en aanmoedigen en bemoedigen en vullen met uw geest en uw inspiratie om aan de slag te gaan met die grote opdracht om uw koninkrijk te vestigen totdat u komt. In Jezus' naam. Amen. Mensen, tot ziens. Blijf nog even hangen, luister naar de muziek. Zoom even uit, zou ik bijna zeggen. Dan kan je dadelijk rustig gaan slapen. Luister eens even naar de tekst en wees bemoedigd. En schaam je niet, je zal niet de eerste zijn die geëmotioneerd raakt door het lied wat je nu gaat horen.
Seek your kingdom through